Let it take you over.
What's up, everybody? This is Conscience. We got Professor Mike. How you doing, Professor Mike?
I'm trying to get that intro cool. I don't know, man.
I know that worked out pretty good. That worked out pretty good.
I think the volume was okay. I think it was okay, man.
Yeah, your samples sound louder too. I can tell you've been tweaking it.
Yeah. Because they're a little bit different. So. Yeah.
So we're talking about Vikings.
The Viking Manifesto. So I want to say a quick story here. So when I was, this was in like 2010 maybe. I'm not sure. My brother could correct me, but me and my brother went to Europe, and we went to Denmark. And shout out to my buddy Lazi. Probably will see this. Denmark and Finland and Sweden, and those countries, including also Norway and Iceland, those are the Norse, the kind of old, where like Vikings, when Vikings were around, would have been from that area, right? So on the plane back at the bookstore in Copenhagen, I got a book called The Viking Manifesto, and I've never been able to find it since, but I read it on the flight home, and it had like this really interesting 9-point philosophy that I'm going to share here. And
cool.
Well, I basically found an image that shows it. Also, I highly recommend that book. It's a relatively easy read, but it's really cool. It's about kind of a Viking approach to business and ethics. I guess it's a cool book. The Viking Manifesto. Okay, so anyways,
everybody go get the Viking Manifesto.
Yeah, man, you can find it on Amazon.
So what are we going over? The nine what? The nine what? The nine what?
The nine noble truths. But before we
get there, noble truths.
Yeah, buddy. Okay. Before we get there, let's spend a little bit of time talking about who the Vikings were.
Okay.
So to do that,
you're calling up you're calling up some stuff.
Yeah, buddy. So I want to show this just real quick before you start. So I have it like this just so it's a little bit easier to read. But I just wanted to show what we're reading here is from Encyclopedia Britannica, and their new entry kind of on Vikings. And we'll use this as kind of a starting point, but I'll just clean that up.
Did you say this is a new article?
I just see
a new
updated.
New update.
It's like their edit. So Britannica just keeps their pages updated, right? So it's like their current Viking page.
Okay.
Sorry. Let's get it back to this.
Okay.
See, just because sorry, man. I just want to say that because if you look at this, it says like unknown date, unknown author, so it makes it look like a shoddy source. But it's just because the app I used to make the page easier to read didn't know what to do with that Encyclopedia Britannica banner.
Right.
Everybody. So yeah, Vikings.
Viking, also called Norseman or Northman, member of the Scandinavian seafaring warriors who raided and colonized wide areas of Europe from the 9th to the 11th century and whose disruptive influence profoundly affected European history.
Okay, stop for a sec, bro.
Yeah, the disruptive influence.
Oh yeah, massively disruptive influence, terrorized. You hear the accounts from like the British priests and stuff like that, and they were terrified of the Vikings.
Okay.
Yeah, man. So what's interesting, so Scandinavian, it said Scandinavian seafaring warriors. They were warriors that were coming from these northern Scandinavias like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, like all that kind of the north. That's why they're called the Northmen.
Okay.
And then the interesting thing there, from the 9th to the 11th century. So remember we were talking in a previous video about how you can kind of see the end of the Roman Empire and their influence, like you could say maybe the 500 AD, and then if you say like the scientific revolution and kind of Da Vinci and all those guys like 1600 or whatever, the period in the middle, that 1,000 years in the middle, is kind of sometimes called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or medieval Europe. So the Vikings are kind of right dab in the middle of that, from 9th century AD to 11th century. These guys are
So they
about
were
a
only
thousand
around
years
for a
ago.
couple hundred years. They're only around for a couple hundred years.
So the Norse people, when people talk about Vikings, they're kind of referring to these warrior groups coming from this area at this time. Now, there were still obviously people in Sweden in the 12th century and 13th century and 14th century and before the 9th century. But when they were at this kind of peak of Vikingness was the 9th to the 11th century. So like
Okay.
middle of the Dark Ages, middle of the medieval Europe.
Right.
So sorry, do you want to go these pagan? You're like halfway through that paragraph.
Yep. These pagan, Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish warriors were probably prompted to undertake their raids by a combination of factors ranging from overpopulation at home to the relative helplessness of victims abroad.
Yeah, man. So think about this for a sec. So these were pagans, right? So a lot of what we know about the Vikings, because they weren't writing too much stuff down in like a documentative language, like say Latin or English or whatever. A lot of what we know about them is from the British monks, who thought
Okay.
these like heathen or pagan, meaning like non-Christian, basically, these like warriors that would raid by boat, right? And we're eventually going to get into the way that they terrorized these places by getting to places where no one else, where other foreign armies couldn't, because they would deconstruct their boats and basically portage across land and put them back in streams, and so they would like attack by water places that have never been attacked by water.
Right. They'd
That's
move
like,
their boats.
yeah, so the Viking boat. I'm just skipping this because those are all just hyperlinks. So let's start here again.
Okay. The Vikings are made up of landowning chieftains and heads, their retainers, freemen, and any energetic young clan members who sought adventure or booty overseas. Nice use of the word booty. At home,
Yeah.
these
So
Scandinavians,
go
go
ahead.
ahead,
Go ahead.
were
No,
independent
just
farmers, but at sea they were raiders and pillagers. During the
yeah.
Viking
So
period,
sorry, man. One of the really interesting dynamics about the Vikings is they had this real split view of things where it was like everything was cool um, when you were away. So like lots of pillaging and raping and stealing and killing and all that stuff. But then their society at home was actually relatively peaceful and equal, and so it's this weird dynamic.
weird.
So sorry, keep going
During
during Viking.
During the Viking period, the Scandinavian countries seem to have possessed a practically inexhaustible surplus of manpower and leaders
Lots
of
of
ability.
soldiers.
Lots of soldiers, yeah, could organize
Yeah.
groups of warriors into conquering bands and armies, were seldom lacking. These bands would negotiate the seas in their longships and mount hit and run raids at cities and towns along coasts of Europe. Their burning, plundering, and killing earned them the name Viking, meaning pirate in early Scandinavian languages.
Yeah, interesting, eh? Like pirate. I'm just making a note to we'll look up these long ships that I was referencing before. And what was so interesting about these long ships is that they were incredibly maneuverable, very fast, but also some of them they could deconstruct. They could basically take apart, travel across land, put them back into water, right? So you got to remember, there's places in Europe, especially like some of the Isle areas in Britain and stuff, that weren't prepared to be hit from a military force by water because they're not like a port on the coast. They've never had people that took apart their boats, and so this longboat thing completely changed things.
Right.
Do you want to just jump to this hyperlink, or should we let's keep going with the Viking stuff for a bit maybe? But
Yeah,
that's
whatever.
interesting. If people didn't know that point, it's interesting to think that the word Viking means pirate.
Yeah.
It's actually the
The
definition.
Vikings, they weren't self-named that. They were given that name.
Yeah,
They were given the
Viking.
name
I
of
mean
pirate.
pirate. Yeah.
Yeah, pirates. Okay.
It
If you
actually is
scroll
the
up a little
word. Yeah, man. Oh,
bit,
you want me to read more?
the
Oh, sorry.
exact
Go ahead.
the exact ethnic composition of the Vikings' armies is unknown in particular cases, but the Viking expansion in the Baltic lands and in Russia can reasonably be attributed to the Swedes. Elsewhere, the non-military colonization of the Orkney Islands, the Faroe Islands, and Iceland was clearly accomplished by the Norwegians.
Yeah. So hang on for a second, man. So this is pretty interesting. So my grandma on mainland, so my dad's mom, traced our family to the Orkney Islands. Maybe that's another thing we can look into in a little bit. But the Orkney Islands are basically the island area at the north part of Scotland, right? So it was interesting because if you had asked me 10 years ago what the background of my family would be, I would have said Scottish and Irish. And now we think that the Scottish might have actually been Norse, right? So it might have been so it's interesting, right? It might have been that the land of Scotland, but controlled by Norse people. Or the history is like so interesting because there's a lot of battle for turf, basically, right? And this
You
is
know
in the
what? It's the same
north.
kind of thing with me. It's the same kind of thing with me. Like my mom's Irish. My dad thought he was Scottish and Ukrainian, but it turns out the Scots are Germans, right? And the last name was Wilke, Wilke. In Germany, it was called Wilk. His name was August Wilk. Then he moved to Scotland and changed his name to Gus Wilkie, put an I before the last E, and changed his
That's
name to
awesome.
Gus Wilkie and acted as a
Damn,
Scot.
that's cool.
Yeah,
That's cool. Oh
my
yeah,
dad
like
felt.
the inter. Sorry, go ahead, bud.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the interconnection of European ancestry and like how much people moved and fought and turf warred basically. So if you look at those places, they're basically saying the exact composition, the exact like who they actually literally were, the
Right.
Vikings. They basically are saying they're the people that are from the Baltic area, so what we would now call like kind of Sweden, Finland, Denmark. I don't know if you'd consider Denmark Baltic, but kind of Finland. When I hear that word, I'm thinking that where kind of Finland touches Russia. It was interesting when I was in Finland. Finland has been controlled by Sweden and also by Russia. So when you go on a street in Helsinki, sometimes there's three names of the street. There's a Finnish name, a Russian name, and a Swedish name. So like Young
Weird.
Street would have like three names.
Yeah.
It's kind of and it's like it's not just by chance. It's not just being sensitive to the people from that country. It's like it was controlled by those people and they renamed it.
So they have
So yeah,
three
it's
national
kind of.
languages.
I don't know if they have three national languages, but they have. Yeah, I don't know if they'd be considered national languages, but kind of functionally or whatever, right? All right, man. So what I was mentioning before is how like a lot of what we know about the Vikings is because of the raids of England. Do you want to go on this part, man?
In
And
England,
the only reason, sorry, buddy, I didn't mean to cut you back off, but the reason why we know from England is because the English, some of this is in a time period, the Dark Ages, where the literacy rates were incredibly low. So the amount of people that were able to write things was incredibly low. Some of the only people that were able to write things were the priests. They would have been able to read and write. So a lot of the records of Vikings are actually these terrified writings. I should have found some. It would be cool of British priests that are like these devils from the north, right? Because they were also big, and they were taking like hallucinogenic mushroom drinks, and they would show up naked, and some of them, the berserkers, right? Take your craziest guys. These guys are like 6 foot plus, huge dudes, Vikings, big guys with battle axes, tripping nuts on mushrooms, foaming at the mouth basically. You can understand why people would be like, these are devil demons,
yeah, of
right? If
course.
if you didn't know they were coming, right? Especially since they're like coming to destroy. It's not like they're coming to like hang out.
How'd you find out that they were taking hallucinogenics? How'd you find that out?
Okay, so let's look at that, right?
Okay.
So I was
Well,
actually at that's not a controversial thing, even though it sounds like it would be. I've been to the Natural Museum of History in Denmark and a whole Viking exhibit when I was on that trip with my brother because my brother was doing a presentation at a conference and I wasn't. I just went with him. So I think he actually was there that day. But I went to a bunch of like museums and stuff there. We went to
right.
a museum in Sweden of like in Stockholm of a sunk ship that they raised and then built a museum around it. It's pretty nuts.
No
But
way,
yeah,
eh?
so I love that part of the world, man. I'd go back there in a second.
Crazy.
Especially Denmark. I've told people that's like the Kitchener of Europe, man. If you're from Kitchener, you'd feel complete. Especially everyone like talked English. It was like super comfortable. People were super cool. We had a bunch of beers at a soccer game though, so that made it. Me and my brother like felt we made a few friends there. We felt
Oh
like
yeah,
that was
right.
like really cool. So yeah, man. Anyways, do
Well,
you want
that's
to talk about?
to be
So this
soccer. That's for sure.
segue,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely relating through sports. So we're talking now about England and how England has this interesting thing because if you look at a map, England's basically right below this, right? So you got these warrior people looking for targets. England has all these relatively unprotected castles and monasteries with gold relics. Remember, a lot of them were. These are also people that aren't Christian, so they don't think anything about stealing like gold, religious things, and melting them, and you know, they're not. Whereas, like maybe the French and the English, they might have been at war, but they still had the same religion.
Right.
It's an important factor that these were not Christian
Right.
raiders, right?
What do they worship? Do you
It-
have
yeah, so the Norse gods. You've heard of some like Loki and Odin and Thor,
Yeah.
right? So there's a whole like what's called Norse mythology
So it's
or
kind of it's
mythology. It's Norse.
right on.
Sorry, say that again. If we talk
It's all
over each other, it doesn't work very good in this. Sorry, man.
it's all mythology, like Greek mythology.
Well,
They
mythology,
many
whatever.
gods.
It's what they didn't think it was mythology, right? Like
Well, of
that's
course
kind of
not,
a
but I'm
modern way. Yeah,
yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah, man, Norse ideas in general. We should do stuff on that. That'd be super cool. Like even
Yeah.
just the story of those three people. Even if we just looked at like Loki and Thor and Odin,
Okay.
that'd be awesome. Even and then we could compare them with like Hercules, Zeus, and whatever, like Greek
Bradley
mythology,
Brown
basically.
named his kid Odin, eh?
Oh yeah,
Now I know where he got it from.
yeah. So Odin is like Zeus,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. It's the same
Odin.
story.
So we're reading on England.
So sorry, yeah. So go ahead.
In England, desultory raiding occurred in the late 8th century, notably the raid of the monastery of Lindisfarne, Holy Island, in 793, but began more earnestly in 865 when a force led by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Halfdan, Inwar, Ivor the Boneless, and perhaps
Ivor the Bones.
Ivor the
Sorry, go
Boneless
ahead.
conquered the ancient kingdoms of East Anglia and Northumbria and reduced Mercia to a fraction of its former size. Yet it was then unable to subdue the Wessex and Alfred to the Great, with whom in 878 a truce was made, which became the basis of a treaty in or soon after 886. They recognize that it's crazy that they have this kind of history, eh?
Oh yeah, man.
That's insane. So
Yeah,
much
this
history.
is in. Yep, yep. No, you're
Like
right.
we're talking about 878. That's crazy.
Yep, yep.
This
So we're talking about well over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
Yep.
crazy. This recognized that much of the England was in Danish hands. Although hard pressed by fresh armies of Vikings from 892 to 899, Alfred was finally victorious over them, and the spirit of Wessex was so little broken that his son Edward the Elder was able to commence the reconquest of Danish England. Before his death in 924, the small Danish states of an old Mercian and East Anglian territory had fallen before him. The more remote
Hang on a
Northumbria.
second, hang on a second. So like think about this for a second. Like it's we're just skimming over this like it's nothing but Danish England,
Yeah.
right? So it's like that. What does that mean? It means at that time the Danes or the people that we would now associate with Denmark
They must have been
were
out
no controlling, right?
controlling.
Like yeah. So anyway, sorry, buddy. That's just an
So
interesting point
England was
here.
controlling the Danes. You're
No,
saying
the other way around. The other way around. Right,
controlling
so
the
they must
English.
have conquered. They must have conquered parts of northern England, and that was almost like Danish.
Holy jeez.
Yeah.
Um, the more remote Northumbria resisted longer, largely under Viking leaders from Ireland, but the Scandinavian power there was finally liquidated by Erdred in 954. Viking raids on England began again in 980, and the country ultimately became part of the Empire of Canute. Nevertheless, the native house was peacefully restored in 1042, and the Viking threat ended with the ineffective passes made by Canute II in the reign of William I.
William the First, I think, yeah,
William
is known as a. I think he. Sorry, man. I think he's kind of known as being pretty key in quashing some of this. Do you want to? Sorry, do you want to just finish this last sentence?
Yep. The Scandinavian conquest in England left deep marks on the areas affected in social structure, dialect, place names, and personal names. English with the pirates.
Yeah, man. Do you want to? So now, what's this next? It's gonna go into just. Yeah, let's keep going on this. Actually, this is pretty cool. Okay, so do you want to just keep going? Can you keep seeing that? The
The
Western
West,
Seas.
Vinland and Ireland. In the Western Seas, Scandinavian expansion touched practically every possible point. Settlers poured into Iceland from at least about 900, and from Iceland, colonies were founded in Greenland and attempted in North America. The
Hang
same
on a sec,
period.
bro. So just think about this for a sec, right? That like, um, the Western Seas. So that's going to be the west of Europe, right? So that's like, so it says here Iceland, Greenland, the Orkney Islands, the Faroe Islands, also like northwestern Europe, the Shetland Islands. I'm not sure what the Hebrides are. The Isles of Man. I think that's also like north of northern Scotland. Again, all things that would be kind of interesting subtopics. Um,
Right.
and I think, yeah, so do you want to do the two Norse sagas? So now, when it's saying saga, it means, and you don't have to try to pronounce that, you can just read the bracket part after. The sagas means like they're epic stories, like the story. If you were to say, what is the mythology? Well, the mythology would be embedded
The
and
North.
held and saved in these stories.
Okay, so two Norse sagas: Saga of the Greenlanders and Eric's the Red Saga. Eric the Red Saga. Eric the Red was a person, I guess. Offer somewhat different
Yeah, so
accounts.
sorry, man. I need to correct what I just said. The sagas are their ancient stories, but these sagas are stories that are more that aren't about the gods, that are actually about conquerors, right? So
Okay,
one of the most famous Vikings of all time is Eric the Red. That's an awesome name, man.
no
But
doubt.
yeah,
I wish
the
they had a
saga.
Wikipedia on him or some kind
Yeah,
of
well,
link.
we can. Okay, I'll write that down, man. Eric the Red. We
Yeah.
do a whole. I think the Vikings are massively interesting. They're like the Northern European pirates. I've never heard somebody say that Viking is a Scandinavian word for pirate.
It's literally
That's
what it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so sorry, man. So what these are accounts of. Now think about this, man. This is mind blowing. When they say the Vinlands, so remember when up here at the title here we were like the Western Seas, the Vinland, and Ireland. The Vinland is North America.
Oh,
So we're
okay.
talking about their early touches on North America.
Newfoundland.
The land of wild grapes, they called it. Interesting. So you want to do this whole
Yeah.
thing starting at the two Norse?
Newfoundlands are not. Aren't the Viking mountain houses still all intact in Newfoundland?
Yeah, that's so we know now that the Vikings were in at least Newfoundland way before Columbus, like hundreds and hundreds of years.
Way before Columbus. So they
I
got
think
across the ocean.
so. They called what we call kind of North America. They call the Vinlands
Yeah.
the land of wild grapes. They called it. That's what that
Yeah.
means.
Imagine how nuts you got to be to set ship out going towards the ocean where you don't know if anything exists. It's crazy.
Yeah. So now it kind of makes sense though, because what they're probably doing is either trying to conquer land or following some kind of maybe they're following fish, but like it kind of makes sense because if you look at the map, they're in Northern Europe. They're kind of drifting over towards the New World. They're going to like, Iceland and Greenland and it's not too far till you start touching in that northern.
Yeah.
So it kind of does make sense, even though, like you said, it's like those early seafaring warriors, like
Yeah.
talk about.
I've got balls of steel.
Yeah. Sorry, man, I'm trying to work these in. Okay,
Eric
so
the Red Saga offers somewhat different accounts of the first Viking visits to North America, which they called Vinland, the land of wild grapes. According to the Greylandinga saga, the first European to sight mainland North America was Bjorn Herolfsen, whose Greenland-bound ship was blown westward off course about 985 and apparently skirted the coastline of eastern Canada before returning to Greenland.
okay,
This
stop for a
tradition
sec,
ten.
bro. Look, stop for a sec. So think about that, man. 985. When was Columbus? 1492? Like almost
Yeah.
500 years after?
Yeah.
985. That's
Yeah.
still like Roman Empire time almost. Not
Yeah.
really, but that's a
When the Roman
crazy
Empire,
amount of time. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think you can kind of say 500, right? So it's kind of like from the end of that to the start of the modern era, the Renaissance,
right.
is kind of what we call like the Dark Ages or medieval Europe or the Middle Ages.
Right.
So sorry, so yeah, so this Bargny guy's the first guy. You want to do this tradition here? I'll scroll for it. Buddy. Go ahead.
Where am I there? This
The
tradition
second
contends.
sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, this tradition contends that about 1,000, a crew of 35 men, led by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, went in search of the land cited by Bjarni and found their way to eastern Canada. Subsequent voyages were said to have been undertaken by Leif's brother, and another voyage led by an Icelandic trader, Thorfinn Karlsevni, reportedly remained in Vinland for 3 some years.
Okay, so hang on a sec. Let's dissect this. So this says this idea of the Vineland's idea is that 1,000. So in 1,000. So obviously we're in 2020 now. In 1,000 is 1,020 years ago. 1,020 years ago, a crew of 35 people. Before we were talking about Eric the Red, this 35 people led by his son, they go in search of land, and they find basically North America, Canada, and then another voyage by the guy's brother and another trader come again, and they stay for 3 years.
Right. Well, the Vikings found Iceland and Greenland as well, right?
Yeah, like all those areas, right?
Like, it's crazy. It wasn't the English, you know? It was the Vikings that found that. It's crazy. Thorfinn and his wife Gudrid are credited with all subsequent exploration. Archaeological discoveries at Lens aux Meadows on the northern tip of
That's sorry, Lons de Meadow is the place where my dad got me like a Vikings hat. Like that's the place. That's the literal place. Should I click on that link?
Yeah,
That's
let's
the
see.
place in Canada where they came.
Lens
Maybe
aux
let's
Meadows.
do that. Why don't we jump to this link, talk about this place, and then we'll do the 9 Noble Truths.
Sure.
Lons Meadows or whatever. Lons de Meadows. Here, let me just. If anyone's wondering what I'm using, there's an extension called Just Read that just makes this a lot easier to look at. All right, well, I'll make this a bit bigger too. Okay, go ahead.
Lens aux Meadows. Lens aux Meadows, site on the northern tip of Newfoundland Island, Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada, of the first known European settlement in the New World. Norse explorers established a large base there about year 1000. From there, they explored Atlantic Canada in several directions, reaching at least as far as the eastern New Brunswick. I didn't know that. Most likely, the site corresponds to Stromfjord, Fjord of Currents in northern Vinland, as described in Eric's saga, Eric the Red saga. The settlement was abandoned after just a few years.
Well, remember that other thing said 3 years, right?
Yeah, 3 years. The settlement was abandoned
Sense?
after a few years. Yeah, a few years. Probably because a small mother colony in Greenland could not support such a faraway outpost. The site was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1978. It's pretty recent.
Yeah, man. Then I don't know. I think this is all just hyperlinks. Okay, so I want to show you this. So I'm going to end this share for a sec. Come back to us. And I want to screen share. Okay, guys, so what I want to do here is show you something I was working on. So, sorry, this is my first time doing this with the PowerPoint here, but I think this is more cool. So, these 9. Yeah, so look, what I want to do is, so they're just one word things, right? Like freedom or truth or whatever. Like they're like 9 words that kind of get to the heart. Oh, wait a sec. Why is that going? Let me go back here. So I want you to think what you think of when you think of these words. It's the first one that just leaked there. Courage.
Courage.
I want you don't think it's corny, man. What do you think? We live in a world right now where courage is a difficult thing. You don't have to
I don't
be
know how
political or
often,
anything, but
and going across the ocean, it takes courage.
yeah, no kidding, man.
Courage to stand up for what you believe in, because there's going to be so many haters these days, right?
Yeah.
That's what applies to modern times. You got to
Okay,
stand
so
up for yourself.
this is kind of what I'm thinking with this. This is an interesting counter narrative. This idea of like maybe we should worry about things like courage. What about this next one? Truth, man.
Yeah, honest with
Courage,
yourself. For sure.
courage, truth, honor. Like actually being a person of your word. You know,
Yeah,
these are almost like lost, old-fashioned things. Fidelity. You know, and what's that word mean to you? Because obviously there's like the marriage-related word, but I think it also means staying true to yourself, not being someone that
yeah,
sways in the wind.
right. Yeah,
Right?
being grounded. Yeah,
Exactly, man. Discipline. You know,
hospital.
hospitality was really important to the Vikings. Right? It's like when you're at my house, even if I'm having a shitty day, I go out of my way to try to help you enjoy your time here because we're kind of all trying to pull each other up a little bit and take care
Yeah,
of each other.
yeah.
Right?
So,
Self-reliance. Think
yeah,
you're these people making these early voyages across the Atlantic 1,000 years ago. You know,
it's
there's no
crazy.
one to call for help if things
No,
go wrong.
yeah, 35
You
men.
know, in that same thing, being industrious, right? Being able to, fix a problem as it comes up, being able to work through things, having skill sets, you know, not being overwhelmed and shut down every time something difficult comes up. And then the last one, and super important, perseverance. And I think taken together, these 9 noble virtues are actually core to this Western um, Norse tradition of what it meant, kind of at a philosophical level. Be a person of courage, speak the truth, have honor and take care of your people and your family, be disciplined, be faithful to the people that you've committed to. Take care of your family, the hospitality stuff, and discipline. Be self-reliant and industrious, and persevere. All right, man. That's all we got for today. Wilk, you want
Cool.
to do a little outro, and then we'll tell everyone thanks for watching. That was
Yeah,
about a
yeah.
half an hour. That was pretty good. This StreamYard's not bad, man. Sorry, guys, if I'm a little sloppy with switching around and stuff, but we'll get
There
better
was
at that. I think
gaps.
this
There was,
worked pretty good.
yeah, it was pretty smooth. So thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, thank you very much. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell. Go follow Digital Academy on YouTube as well. Have a good night. Make sure to join us next time we go live. Cheers, guys. Digital Academy and Conscience. Check it out. Subscribe.